Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I'm your co-host, JP John Paz, for the two-man power trip. Of course, joining me, my financial wrestling genius co-host himself, Mr. Lavi Margolin. Lavi, how you doing today, sir?
Hey, John, I'm doing great. A special day. It's rare that my full-time work in academia, I guess in higher education, crosses over to speak to someone on the podcast that works in the world of higher education and is an esteemed professor, but we're very fortunate to have that opportunity. I'd like to welcome Dr. Michael Leeds, professor of economics at Temple University, one of whose expertise is sports economics, to the podcast. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Michael, first and foremost, when did you kind of develop an interest in the economic part of sports? Like, when did that kind of come about?
Oh, my. I would say about 25, 26 years ago. I can almost point to the day. I taught a course in labor economics. I'm a labor economist by training, and was looking for a way to talk about discrimination in a way that wouldn't kind of excite passions, and came across a paper on discrimination in the National Basketball Association and used that to talk about discrimination. The class ate it up, and there was no turning back.
Did you follow pro wrestling? I know we're talking about sports and NBA and stuff, but did you follow pro wrestling? Were you into wrestling at all?
Not since my step-grandfather, Max, who owned a shoe repair shop in Long Branch, New Jersey, died.
Wow, Long Branch. That's not too far away from me. I'm in Asbury Park, so basically 2 towns over. I'm very close to Long Branch.
I grew up between Asbury Park and Long Branch in Ocean Township.
Nice. What a small world. My God, if I take a skip and a hop and a jump behind me, I can go to Ocean in 2 seconds. Yeah. New Jersey is a nice place. Maybe getting a little too expensive, but it's a great place to live.
Oh, it was a great place to grow up.
So what era of fan, when would that be? Who were the big stars of that era?
In wrestling?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Bruno Sammartino, Cowboy Bill Watts, Gorilla Monsoon, Haystacks Calhoun, some guy called, I think, the Sheik, Argentinian Apollo. I'm surprised I remember all these names. It's taking me back to my childhood.
Yes. So since then, it wasn't really like covering wrestling or a love affair of wrestling or looking at the economics of wrestling at all.
No, it was more wrestling as WrestleMania as an example of what we call a mega event in sports, kind of a one-off, large-scale, usually national or international or at least regional attraction, as opposed to the Yankees or the Mets or the Flyers or something like that.
What were your thoughts when Philadelphia, obviously, Temple University's home base there, when they were bidding on WrestleMania? What was your thoughts?
Well, my thought with regard to all these things, any kind of event of this kind is, I hope they did their homework. I hope they paid attention to some of the research that's been done on this, and that they don't bid too high and don't try to expect too much to come from this. My feeling about almost anything of these kinds, whether it's the Olympics, the World Cup, the Super Bowl, WrestleMania, is if you want to do it and it makes the population feel good and happy, and there's all reason to do that. That's great. Do it, but don't think it's going to jumpstart the local economy.
Do you think they overbid Philadelphia for WrestleMania?
I haven't seen the fine points. I don't know exactly what the expenditures were, but I can say that from what I've seen in the press reported about the revenues that come in from these things, those statements seem well too high.
Really? So too much, basically. I know me and Lavi have talked about it before. So you're not getting as much from people coming out of town than they maybe think that they're getting.
Right. No,
well, how do you figure that? Like, just because they're thinking it's going to be double and it's going to be like, how do you actually figure that out?
Okay, there are several things. One is maybe the biggest is that you want to count only new money, money that would not have been spent in the local economy if, in this case, WrestleMania had not been here. And so you want to make sure that you're not counting, for example, expenditure by the local population. If you live in Philadelphia and if it weren't for WrestleMania, you would have gone to some other event at the Wells Fargo Center. You would have gone to a hockey game. If you hadn't gone to WrestleMania, you would have gone out to dinner a couple of times. That this was kind of part of your entertainment budget for the year. That should not count because it's simply taking money out of one pocket and putting it out into the other. The other factor is that you want to be sure that you're accounting for any possible displacement. So if people who come to WrestleMania displace people who would have come to the city but don't because they couldn't get a room because of WrestleMania, don't because they thought, well, it would just be too crowded, for whatever reason, to the degree that they displaced other people. And this is most common, for example, in the Super Bowl, which is in a warm weather destination city in early February, that they're just, they say, well, the hotels are 100% full, but the hotels would have been 80% full anyway. So there's not that much new spending in town. So you want to make sure you account for that as well. And once you do all that and then account for things like what I'll call leakages, the fact that some of the money comes in but then goes out, that money spent at a vendor, say at Lincoln Financial Field, who buys the hot dogs from someplace in Chicago or Milwaukee, that's money coming in and money going out. So once you account for all that, it's not, it's not tiny, it's not inconsiderable, but compared to the local economy, it's very small pickings indeed.
Is it almost, it just sounds great to have the Super Bowl or WrestleMania in your town, maybe not as much of a financial influence, it's almost like the perception of it?
Oh, yes. I mean, we once did some back of the envelope calculations, some co-authors and I, and found that the income of all the major league sports in North America are roughly equivalent to the revenue of Northwestern Mutual Insurance Company. And you don't see a Northwestern Mutual Insurance spot on the local news, for 5 or 10 minutes every night. That sports occupy a part of our brain that is far, far bigger than their economic footprint.
Now, with WrestleMania coming to town, like for me, for instance, Asbury Park to Philadelphia took me an hour. I just literally paid for gas. Everything I bought, though, was at the stadium necessarily. So I guess maybe that goes towards the economy. But then I'm buying merch, right? That goes to WWE. If you go to WWE World, which was the convention center, that goes to WWE. So maybe it's not all going to Philadelphia or the town. Most of it's going to WWE.
Right. And again, you have local people, and these facilities, Lincoln Financial Field, Citizens Bank Park, the local stadiums are almost all built with easy access to interstate highways, and that's not an accident. So that people can come in from the suburbs or from a more remote origins and get right back out again. So it's designed to get people in and out and not stick around and spend money in the local economy.
So 145,000 people were there in 2 days. But how much of that and how many of those people are like local or close, like me? I mean, I'm a drive away. I mean, how many could you figure that out, or was that something that would take a lot of like research to really dig into that?
To get a precise number, it would take some research. But I think that for something like WrestleMania, again, it will draw people from the region, from the country, and even internationally. But I think a sizable number of those people are going to be relatively local, meaning Philadelphia, the surrounding metropolitan area, maybe out to central Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, but not that far.
Let me hand it over to Lavi because I know he's got a lot of good, pertinent questions for you as well.
Yeah, and just to take a step back, I really enjoyed the article, the brief interview in Temple Now. I have a lot of Google alerts, so that's how I found it. Something that really struck out to me about your work was that sort of contrarian view. A lot of times when these type of events come to town, people find economists or experts who are just going to rubber stamp it. How do you sort of take that perspective? And have you ever had any blowback from it, sort of from any of the leagues or entertainment sources?
I've never had any blowback from the leagues, and a part of that is because I clearly have not had any impact on any decision that any city has made. That we are kind of small voices in the wilderness about all this. So I think one of the things, though, that we generally find is that after the fact, cities say, "Oh gosh, there's not as much money here as we thought there was." So we take satisfaction in the fact that usually we're proven right after the fact, but unfortunately, not many people pay attention at the time.
So, of course, obviously, John and I follow pro wrestling a lot, but being in the bubble, we also understand the perception of pro wrestling outside of the bubble, which has changed somewhat, but I think it's still, for 120 years, it's still the same perception, sort of potentially low rent. So when you use the term displacement, do you think when pro wrestling comes to town, some people are sort of like, well, maybe I'll come a different time as opposed to the NCAA Final Four, or it's basically the same?
Well, again, I don't think that it's, people are turned off by the wrestling itself, but just that, again, there's all this big to do, and in a way, it's creating its own displacement. They say, oh, all these people are coming to town. It's going to be a big, big event. Lots of people are going to be here. And people say, I don't want to be there when all this is happening. I don't want to go to town when there's going to be hordes of people coming around. So I could see how people would put off a trip to the Liberty Bell, a trip to Independence Hall, because they just don't want to be bothered with the crowds, or maybe have trouble finding a room in the hotel that they wanted to be in.
So when these economic models are done by firms or academics that are paid for usually by a pro wrestling company or a league, is there sort of is there like a fork in the road where maybe they could take a path where it shows the full clarity that is not as big as it could be, and they're taking the one that's more positive? Sort of like, what's the trade-off for someone that's getting paid for something like this?
My father, who, by the way, was a CCNY graduate, I think I saw you on your resume that you went to CCNY, Alaguru Alagara. My father was a civilian employee of the Defense Department, and he once said that he never saw the government, the Army, test anything and have that test be unsuccessful. The tests were always a success. And almost invariably, when you have a commissioned report of this kind, the report is, they know what side of the bread is buttered. They know that if we want them to come back and commission another report later on, if we say, this is really, maybe overstating a bit, but this is really a waste of time. This is a waste of the city's money. The WWF, FIFA, the IOC, the Phillies, whoever it is, they're not going to come back to you and say, we'd like to commission another study that's going to say how worthless our product is. So yes, they're almost invariably, if you know who's paying for it, you know what they're going to say.
So, and I love City College Talk. It's a wonderful, wonderful institution. So, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there, especially for WrestleMania, there's a lot of like peripheral events happening that are not under the WWE's purview. In fact, years ago they tried to block it, where they would, without being so precise about it, they would sign contracts, let's say with the city, where other smaller wrestling outfits couldn't use government-owned buildings, or or something like that. So, for example, at a catering hall, there was for 4 days shows, four shows a day that sold 1,000 tickets total. So 4,000 times that. We had a list, and it was about 75 peripheral shows, whether they were autograph signings or other smaller wrestling shows. So 75 maybe times 200 people a show, $20 a show. Is there anything to make of that, or it's just like such a small factor that when you're thinking about economic impact, these peripheral things may impact that particular venue, let's say 2,300 arena, but not necessarily something that we can look at like citywide?
Right. There are a couple of things to unpackage there. One is that you have to be careful. And again, one of the things that studies, if they're not careful, one trap they can fall into is to count people who go to events like that and who go to the so-called main event as separate people. So that's one danger, because what these studies typically do is they try to count up the number of visitors, and then they have a formula for how long they expect a typical visitor to stay and how much a typical visitor spends in a typical day. And they just multiply. This many people show up, they on average stay this many days, and every day they spend this much money. You multiply them all together and you get how much money is spent. But if you count people who go to the smaller event, this satellite event, like you said, and who go to WrestleMania as separate people, and they're actually the same people, you can very quickly blow up the economic impact. The other thing is that, again, you're right, the total amount of economic activity in Philadelphia is, and I calculated it once, and I think it's in the hundreds of billions of dollars. This is not a lot of money compared to an economy the size of Philadelphia's. So again, I once did some back of the envelope calculations for Chicago, which has 5 major league sports teams all playing within the city limits. And I found that they account for a small fraction of 1% of the Chicago economy. So if the Bears, the Cubs, the White Sox, the Bulls, and the the Blackhawks all disappeared, the Chicago economy would barely notice it. And so, it's important to note it's just a small potato.
So a reporter whom we respect very much named Zach Arnold has been very focused on TKO, of course, a division of Endeavor run by Ari Emanuel's focus on government contracts or government subsidies, both for WWE and the UFC, especially since they recently combined under the TKO brand. And that seems to be like really a focus of their efforts for growth going forward. Do you think that's a winning strategy to try and constantly solicit bids from cities and even look for synergy in terms of saying, if you bid on WWE, we could bring you UFC or vice versa?
And I think the key word you used, this leads us into another kind of train of thought, is bid. Because one of the things that you actually want to do is to set up what I'll call a bidding war. This leads us into something called the winner's curse, which is kind of a fascinating concept, which is that whenever you have an auction type setting, and that's what this is like, you're auctioning off the right to host WrestleMania, you're auctioning off the right to host the Final Four, you're auctioning off the right to host the World Cup, whatever it is. Whenever you have an auction setting with an uncertain payoff, there's something that no one can precisely put a value on, that the winning bid will typically be higher than the value of the item being auctioned off. And that's why it's called the winner's curse, because the winner winds up losing. And there are reasons for that. We could go into if you want, but that's one of the things that they actually really, really want to see, and why they really try to create almost like a contest or an auction type atmosphere when they try to sell the rights to host events of this kind.
For pro wrestling, the first time that I can remember this becoming like a thing was that Orlando in around 2007, 2008 bid on WrestleMania, and then the WWE, I believe, hired that person from the Orlando government to then begin soliciting bids, and it took off from there. But just historically, I'd imagine the Super Bowl for many, many years has had this sort of process. But when did it sort of disseminate to other leagues, other premier events that weren't of the stature of the Super Bowl?
That's a great question. And this is not exactly answering your question, but I can trace this whole thing back, well, to two events. One is the departure of the Giants and the Dodgers from New York. That kind of brought to an end, a clear end. I guess it ended about 4 or 5 years earlier with the Braves leaving Boston, but this really put down the final curtain on what was called the Golden Age of baseball. That from 1903 to 1953, no team entered, no team left, there was no expansion, no contraction, no team moved. But with the departure of the Braves, and especially with the departure of the Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers, you saw that no city was safe. And cities that once saw, hey, we can bid a team away, and cities saw that if we have a team, we've got to do all we can to keep it. If we want to keep it, we're going to have to ante up and make sure we keep it. That was the first real time when this sort of setting began to show up. And then it showed up in earnest in the wake of the 1984 Olympics, the so-called Los Angeles Olympics, which by some measures at least was highly profitable. I say by some measures because usually what we mean by that is the organizing committee profited tremendously, not necessarily Los Angeles, but it was supposedly hugely profitable. And that's when you began to see cities bidding in earnest on mega events like this. And it took off from there. Now, when it kind of spread beyond these kind of large international competitions, I'm not quite sure, frankly.
So sometimes, the way that I think about it is sometimes economics don't have to make sense for someone to pay for it, especially if we utilize a term like sports washing. In pro wrestling, the earliest I could think back from it in modern times was when North Korea hosted in Mayday Stadium in Pyongyang, actually the highest attended pro wrestling shows of all time, where it was reported that 180,000, one day 130,000 people the next day appeared, not necessarily paying for their tickets, but were compelled to do so. And in modern times for WWE, and we saw that it was sort of the first shot of them doing it, but Saudi Arabia first using pro wrestling to sort of bring attention to their efforts for growth, running into some difficulty with the Jamal Khashoggi situation, but now doing so with golf and a number of different things. So how does sports washing, potentially, not necessarily saying that you have to agree with that example, but how does potentially sports washing, or more broadly, foreign governments, change the economics of bidding for events?
Yeah, well, that's actually a really interesting question, and one can go back certainly at least as far as the 1936 so-called Nazi Olympics, which was actually a hugely successful example of sports washing, where they managed to somehow convince the world that Germany was this wonderful place. Nazi Germany was this wonderful place. We view it through the lens of World War II and Jesse Owens, but at the time, it was a tremendous public relations success for Germany. But sports washing, one, has limits, and two, can be a two-edged sword, or at least the attempt to use sports washing can be a two-edged sword. Take, for example, China. China's hosting the Olympics, I guess, especially in 2008. The more recent Winter Olympics were a little funky because of COVID. But in 2008, one of the things it brought attention to was how horribly polluted China is. When athletes showed up wearing masks because they were afraid to breathe the air, that it brought up Tibet and the repression of the Tibetan people and the Uyghurs. So there's always a danger of this happening. The classic example is maybe the World Series, not the World Series, I think it was an All-Star game. Maybe it was the World Series. Well, at one point, you had Howard Cosell on national television saying the Bronx is burning. They were showing a fire not far from Yankee Stadium. So you run into dangers that bad things can be shown as well as good things. The other point is that in terms of things like legacy effects, people are going to, come to WrestleMania and they're going to start singing Philadelphia's praises to the world, and we're going to see a huge boost in tourism. And one of the problems with that is that sports tourists in general, not just wrestling or any specific sport, sports tourists in general focus on one thing and one thing only, and that is the event they're going to. And so when someone says, "Oh, you went to, Rio for the Olympics, how was it?" And they're going to say, "Oh, it was fantastic, and I saw the gymnastics, and I saw the swimming, and I saw, the field hockey," or whatever it was they went to see. They're not going to talk about the beaches. They're not going to talk about the sights. They're not going to talk about all of the things that a typical tourist goes to see. And tour agencies have said that the word of mouth on these types of events are pretty lousy. Not that they're bad-mouthing it, but that they're talking about things that are just not going to be reproduced and that are of little value to someone who's just wondering where to go on vacation. So it's limited, and it can be a two-edged sword.
So last question from me before I turn over to John. Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, if they go one way or another with their bidding, they'll be fine. But I've started to see from, just following local articles and so on, that chambers of commerce and small sized towns might say, we're going to use some of our municipal money and we're going to bring in a mid-sized event, or we're going to pay for a pro wrestling show, and it'll be televised, on a local on a national cable channel, and it'll bring attention to us. If you were to advise such small governments, what would you say to them? What should they be cautious of, and what should they look for?
I would say it's actually particularly dangerous for a small to mid-sized town to do this sort of thing. I think that, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the town outside of Atlanta where the Braves moved to. They're having buyer's remorse. You're seeing, you can see it in the Meadowlands when they say, "Oh, hosted the Super Bowl." Well, where did everybody who went to the Super Bowl, where did they stay? They didn't stay in East Rutherford. Okay, that the beneficiary of all this, if anything, was New York. New York came out great from New Jersey hosting the Super Bowl. And it's because people stayed in New York hotels. If anything, they went out to dinner in New York. They did things in New York, and New York didn't have to spend a penny. New York didn't have to do anything. So the problem with the small town is that there are just huge leakages. People don't stay there. People don't spend their money there. They'll stay in the big town next door. And so it really becomes a burden and without really much of the benefit. They get even less benefits than a city like Philadelphia or New York or Dallas or LA.
Now, where could everybody find you, keep up with what you're doing, everything as far as obviously Temple University as well?
Where can people keep up with me?
Yeah, if they want to follow you, see some of your writings, see what you're up to.
Oh, golly. Well, I have a website. You can come to Temple University and look up my website, the economics department at Temple University. I confess I'm a little bit old school. I don't have a Twitter feed or anything like that. But if they want to get in touch with me, I'll be happy to give them a piece of my mind.
Yeah, all right. Awesome. Michael, thank you so much for all the time. Really appreciate it. Thank you for giving us a little bit of an economics lesson today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.
Take care. Avi, as far as some of the other news to take care of for today, what's going on with Triller? Did we lose you? Are you frozen, Lobby?
Hi, John. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Can you repeat what you last said? It broke up.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Talking about the Triller news. What's coming out down and what's coming out from Triller?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it all out. So it was a surprise to see this news. We knew that for a while they had been looking to go public, onto the stock market. But there was a different way that they ended up going public. At closing of the business combination, Triller will be a wholly owned subsidiary of AGBA. The valuation of the combined company will be $4 billion, with the stockholders of Triller and the holders of Triller's RSUs owning 80% of the post-merger group. So this is something interesting to note, that although it will still be listed at the moment as AGBA, that it's actually Triller's ownership that now has 80%, and of course AGBA the other 20%. Bobby Sarnavesht, Chief Executive Officer of Triller, said, "Through this merger, we are poised to accelerate our innovation trajectory and significantly expand our market's presence, creating unparalleled value for our users and stakeholders globally. In addition, with the transaction approved by both company boards and majority shareholders, we believe this is the most efficient route for Triller to access public capital markets and secure the liquidity needed for rapid growth. Triller's digital media, social selling, combat sports, and SAS businesses have experienced tremendous growth, and this merger positions Triller to achieve new milestones." By strategically integrating AGBA's financial service expertise, which shows innovation of AI-driven digital content, this merger establishes new benchmarks in the convergence of technology, finance, and media. So whenever there's combinations of these unique nature, I'm kind of curious, right? You have financial services and you have what Triller does. And you see these combinations, and again, without having a deep expertise of the stock market and to evaluate this deal specifically, I do have questions and I am curious. But we are seeing a positive impact already on AGBA's stock. It went from a penny stock on the NASDAQ at about 40 cents per share, all the way up to $1.50 before moving down a little bit. The last I checked was $1.30. So it's kind of volatile right now. We'll have to see where things settle. I question things. I know that on the pro forma sheet they came to a $4 billion valuation. I'm curious to learn more. And when you see a merger of this kind, although I can't confirm this for sure, I understand that AGBA may have had an investment or prior relationship with Triller, somebody that's connected, that doesn't work for either, but has some connections with one of them, had shared that with me. That might be public already, of course, but I'm curious about the stability of a deal like this and what it ultimately means for Fight and Fight Plus, sort of coming down from the mountain to more on the ground level, which of course we concentrate on for its relevancy to the business of the business.
Speaking of some more business, what about Abima? What are they up to? Because I know obviously they owned Noah, right? I think they own Pro Wrestling
Yeah.
Noah.
So they're right. So they're part of like that cyber agent consortium. Pro wrestling promotions under their umbrella. So Abima has already streamed pro wrestling before, including New Japan, I believe, and certainly when New Japan versus Noah, that series of events. But now there's something called Abima Live. New TV Future has launched Abima Live globally as a new online live platform to deliver entertainment from Japan and across Asia. So this includes, most significantly, the All Together event, that All Together for the different pro wrestling promotions in Japan. And this service covers America, South Korea, Thailand, and the Philippines.
Speaking of Japan, there's another new promotion in Japan, right? And there's another Joshi promotion out there now. What is Marigold?
Yeah, so Marigold is the one that was started by the guy that
Rosie Ogawa.
Rosie Ogawa. Thank you, John. You saved me many times. So he has this promotion out. He has a lot of loyal wrestlers that are coming along, including Julia. But the element that I found most curious about it is this will stream on Wrestle Universe, which I think is owned by Cyber Fight. So it gets, unless I'm mixing it up, so it gets really confusing. There's all these different services, including marketing to America, that are kind of all around the same thing, but they're being distributed in different ways. And it gets really confusing before we talk about New Japan, right? Because New Japan has distributed to Abima, which is owned by Cyber Fight. So it's, but they have their own service. So I guess it's one by one. What's most advantageous, even for brands, to determine what's the best way to make money, or even when you own a number of things, to figure out the best way to distribute. But again, this speaks to the fact for North American fans, especially, like, it's just confusing. It's hard to follow, and maybe it's better to have things on like one particular service so that people know where to go.
And Julia will be, I guess, WWE bound or NXT bound. She showed up on the NXT show. But as far as New Japan, like you had mentioned, what is going on with New Japan? Because now Jon Moxley is the new IWGP World Heavyweight Champion.
Yeah, so that certainly speaks to a wonderful chess piece, which they had in the fold, but now sort of representing them fully. worldwide. So that will certainly help them as they have their North American strategy. However, and no shade on WrestleTix, this is just what the map was showing. In that last week we talked about their wonderful attendance in Chicago, which was like 6,200. But now we find out a few days later it was just over 5,200, meaning that 1,000 less, meaning that some upper deck tickets that had been for sale were taken off sale and then put back just before the event. So it became clearer how much tickets had actually sold, which makes sense because once it, as we talked about for weeks and weeks, once it hit that 5,000 plus number, things really slowed down because you had the ticket brokers that bought all these tickets in the upper first part of the bowl that were selling them cheap, and then they put the second tier tickets on sale that were sort of at the same price or maybe even a little bit more expensive, and then people could just buy the resale tickets. So I was really impressed that they got to over 6,000, but once we saw more information, it made sense that they did not get there. So New Japan was moved on Access TV to Wednesdays at 10 p.m. I don't think we have any ratings there yet, but curious to see because for Impact was basically doubling New Japan on the same night. So curious to see how they'll do with that. I think what is it, AEW in terms, I don't know if Access does a staggered feed, but thinking about the East Coast, right? AEW runs on Wednesday nights 8 to 10, and then New Japan is Wednesday nights at 10. So somebody in theory could switch over. So maybe that will help them a little bit. Curious about that. Rocky Romero is now the vice president of show and talent coordination at New Japan. I'm just confused. I know that he's been executive at New Japan USA for a while. I don't know, how this changes his role necessarily. And he's also said to be working for AEW, which not necessarily a conflict of interest because both know that he's working for them, but sometimes there's maybe mismatched priorities. So when you have somebody at that level, especially on New Japan, it seems difficult to have you working for both, especially as they have, even though I'd assume Rocky isn't involved in those discussions or negotiations, right? But for the Worlds Collide event, it was said that New Japan didn't want to pay for half for Arthur Ashe to rent out the stadium, so they moved it to Long Island. There's just a lot of information out there because last year we heard with Toronto that AEW had just paid a licensing fee to New Japan to use their talent and their name, so that New Japan didn't benefit as much by selling out the huge arena in Toronto at good prices. So maybe things change between now and then. But in terms of their overall strategy, I think in the US now, I think that they're in the right rhythm again. They're smartly going for these mid-sized type venues, somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000 people, and scaling it down, of course, if it's 8,000. But returning to the Capitol, to Washington, D.C., Capitol Collision, the Entertainment Sports Arena in D.C., it's another good-sized venue for them. So Northern California, Southern California, DC, Chicago. This just seems like a good rotation for them if they're going to do 5 or 6 shows a year smartly. They're not running those, and then however it plays out with Forbidden Door, that seems to work really well. And staying away from trying these to make their own USA brand that runs these smaller venues where it's difficult to draw 1,000 people.
And just to follow up on Rocky Romero, I believe he works for CMLL as well. So the trifecta for Rocky Romero working all these promotions, who obviously all work together now.
Yeah, I think he brings so much value, and I think one of the strongest values is just keeping all these things together, right? And these alliances can really break apart, and he has that deep understanding of each organization. I guess a little newer to AEW, but he knows a lot of the talented people there. But having worked with the other two, especially New Japan, for so long, that if somebody needs to reach somebody or whatever, or just cultural understanding and so on. He's been in all these places, so he has that area. As we saw with New Japan, they could be very sensitive, as it was rumored at least that when Chris Harrington Mukigana, originally of WrestleNomics, right, was sent quietly before AEW started to try and establish a relationship, they were sort of a little offended that it wasn't Tony Khan that was there. So you have to like understand the expectations of all in order to keep people happy and have these good relationships.
Very true. What is the latest on TNA Wrestling, who seems to be doing okay? I know their last show did pretty good.
So, first piece of news was that their UK distribution, which is a little bit confusing because I thought they were already on in the UK. According to their website, they are. But firstly, they announced that they're back on iOSat TV, channel 186 on Sky, which is classic TNA premium live event. So interesting to see that they're using the WWE's industry leader language now. Every Wednesday and Saturday night at 9 p.m., TNA's greatest matches and TNA in 60 will also be broadcast. So a good way of, getting classic content. And they have, especially when you look at it in isolation, not necessarily in an episodic way, which a lot of us found very frustrating at the time. But in terms of the talent as it stands alone in matches, it's very appealing. So that's a good way to get extra money out of it. But it's a little bit confusing to me because is it really a return to the UK? Because the Zone channel 429 is on Sky apparently on Friday nights still at 22 hours and 15 minutes. So I don't know if that's not the case anymore, what that means, like a return to the UK. But from their website, it's still showing that. But certainly as like a supplemental broadcast, it's a smart thing to do. What else is going on? They announced their return to Cicero Stadium, which is one of my favorite televised venues for smaller promotions. It just, especially when it's full, it looks great on TV on June 14th. So just a look ahead at their schedule. We'll talk about Vegas in a moment, how they're doing with that. Albany, New York upcoming, Newport, Kentucky, and we said Cicero Stadium, which is actually for 2 nights. So as of the last time I checked, and this is a few days, or as maybe last time WrestleTix posted, and then as we're recording this, which is in advance of these shows, that on April 20th, Rebellion 550 in Vegas, and on April 21st, 314 Impact Live. So I think people are making a little bit too much of this because the last time they were in Vegas, it was the return of TNA. And it was, you're bringing an international New Japan star who was returning, I believe, for the first time in forever. It's not necessarily like a Scott D'Amore thing where people are like, oh, last time one show they did 1,500 or whatever it is, and look how they're doing now. I think they would have had the same issues. But we also have to look at like what's the final number, because last time it picked up late. Also, Vegas, you have the opportunity to comp or even Carnival Bar people into the shows just because there tends to be a lot of people around.
Yes, true. I feel like maybe under the radar a little bit. TNA. I feel like they're doing okay. You know what I mean? Like decent shows. I know Hard to Kill last month or the month before did about 65,000 buys, which I know doesn't sound great, but in the grand scheme of things, is pretty great and one of their best numbers they've ever done. So it seems like they're kind of headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that number yet. That's really impressive, especially if it doesn't account for their streaming service and so on. So that's a big win for them. I think they're doing what they're doing, and they know who they are for the most part. And with the change in management, some things could change, but they're not, like we were talking about 6 months ago or whatever. We're trying to figure out, are they spending more? Are they spending less? And so on. It looks like they're spending about the same. They're conservative in venue selection. They're not being like ultra cheap about it, of just like running a sound stage in Nashville or just running the college in Canada exclusively. They are going places and switching it up. They are signing some talents go and so on, but they are who they are. So if they are making money or doing what Anthem expects them to do with their media assets and bringing attention to Access TV. I'd assume it's the highest rated show on there consistently, from what I know of, it seems to be, but also helping to prop up Fight Network worldwide. They're on their game channel as well. I'm not sure how their streaming on demand service is doing, but that's been around a while. So I think that's an important thing to know who you are.
How about GCW, Game Changer Wrestling? What's going on?
Yeah, so big news for New Jersey. It was promoted as such, but and John, you can let me know if it's as big news as it seems. But it ended up being that House of Independence in Asbury Park reopened, and that was the big news, that GCW will be there. So from your local paper, of course, the Asbury Park Press, talking about House of Independence overall, GCW was announced within that. The weather is heating up, and so is the concert scene at the House of Independence, after a social media post earlier this month announced that Asbury Park scheduled shows. The first one is the Taylor Party, TS Dance Party, and Bieber Party. Also scheduled is the New Jersey Freestyle, and Game Changer Wrestling returns on August 4th.
How about,
As we look at some additional... Sorry, John.
I was going to say, how about Philly?
Yes. So as we talked about with Brett a number of times, of course, outside of the the recent collective weekend, which was in Philadelphia, Brett had talked about that if people from Philadelphia wanted to see GCW, they were sort of like in and around that market. But that's the first time now they're coming back to Philadelphia, or the Philadelphia area, which is at Harrah's Casino. I believe I've seen pictures that some wrestling has taken place sort of like on an outside part of the casino. So I'm curious to see if it'll be there, or if it'll be an indoor part. Have you ever seen independent wrestling at the casino over there?
No, I haven't.
So I'm curious to see. When I was looking at Cage Match, there was like a Yokozuna tribute show, which had, of course, many members of the Anoa'i family, which looked like a special evening there. But not surprisingly, there's been a flurry of announcements of forthcoming GCW dates following the collective. But just looking ahead a little bit at their schedule, on April 20th is How High in LA, just GA available, so probably a sellout. The Breaking GCW in about the same venue where they taped a portion of Breaking Bad on April 21st. It looks like a very small venue with 3 rows reserved, but that will probably sell out with just general admission available. In Tampa on May 3rd, that one looked a little bit slow. Chicago, we'll have to see on May 25th, but just ahead of that. Columbus on May 26th. And Atlantic City, of course, for the death matches is always a strong draw for those interested in that sort of thing, which is obviously a number of people. June 1st and June 2nd, Tournament of Survival, Cage of Survival, and then a return to Phoenix on June 16th.
Now, what about maybe the most important story of the day, Global Force Wrestling?
So Jeff Jarrett, as we were talking about last time, obviously he has this brand name back, Global Force Wrestling, Global Force Entertainment. So it's a number of things, both in terms of announcing or utilizing their new website, the Global Force Entertainment website, to announce in a press release the return to AAA with Parker Boudreaux as well, sort of who's already out there. But this Global Force Entertainment website is very curious to me. Of course, Jeff having all those responsibilities in AEW, it includes a link at the top bar to AEW events, but it's also going for a wrestling news component. The My World podcast, the Horseshoes Baseball. We've talked to representatives of Jeff Jarrett's gaming platforms as well. So a lot going on. It's basically all things Jeff Jarrett. It's just curious to see this brand emerge first, as we talked about with the horseshoes. Then we see utilized with AAA. Now it's a website. So curious to see how that grows and how that also sort of balances out with AEW responsibilities.
What is going on with MLW, Major League Wrestling?
So just a quick piece on them. Of course, there's more going on that we'll talk about next week. But the MLW Azteca Lucha show, which when it was first put on sale, was promoted as like one of the fastest ticket selling shows in a number of years. So with a few hundred reserved seats, in terms of my quick math, there was just about 2 to 3 individual tickets left in terms of reserve. So imagining that will go, and then some GA sections. Of course, as we know, in Cicero Stadium, there's the tiered seating because it's a stadium, even though it's a small venue. So I'm curious to see how that will look. If they continue to fill it up, it should look great on TV, like it has in the past.
As far as Prestige Wrestling is concerned, what is going on with Prestige Wrestling?
So they're getting ambitious here. They're running a venue at Portland State in Oregon, which is about a 3,500 seat venue with as many known talents as they can. Slamovich, Donhausen, Alex Shelley, and so on. Looks ambitious, but if they have the momentum on their side, give it a try. Let's see what happens. But it just struck me like this is the type of venue that AEW really should be booking at this point. It would look full. It would look great rather than 2,000 in Indiana and you're blocking off 16,000 seats. But also, as we get from time to time through Eventbrite, Prestige has hosted 5,000 people over 32 events, but this also includes like autograph signings and that sort of thing. So it's not necessarily all shows that they've had, all wrestling shows, 156 average. So their events tend to be, on average, lower attended, but they have some momentum without being intimately familiar with them. So curious to see how they do in this bigger venue.
And finally, a big story about little guys. What about micro wrestling?
So, John, I've been thinking about it, and I'm going to go out on a limb here. There's just, in my opinion, right now, of like although micro wrestling, I'm not sure if they're the ones with that reality TV deal or whatever that we've talked about before, but in terms of non-weekly wrestling programming, of people that could run shows from coast to coast, I think there are just 2 promotions that can do so right now at their level. GCW and micro wrestling. So
Really?
a bit,
Wow.
that because like right there, they're crisscrossing the country from coast to coast, Midwest, whatever it may be, and they're just doing so consistently, and they both seem to be doing well.
Okay, fair enough.
So via Cowboy State Daily, on micro wrestling, for decades, the freewheeling anything goes WWE set the standard for wrestling, but make that smaller than ever. The MWF is fast gaining popularity across the country. The full-scale spectacle is rostered by casts all under 5 feet. Founded in 2000 by CEO Jack Darrell Hillegas, the MWF is the longest-running organization within the little person industry, and by the numbers, the most successful to date. Micro wrestling has been featured in Sports Illustrated, country music, and even its own reality series on Discovery. So that answers that. Their live shows are a combination of wrestling bouts and Jerry Springer shows gone wrong. It's the WWE for South Park fans. This Saturday night, the Little Brawlers make their way to Cheyenne for an epic one-night-only throwdown in Forum 619. We need Rey Mysterio. These micros, as they call themselves, really get around. Up to 10 competitors and support staff travel from town to town with very few nights off. So that's a great way to keep costs down, just 10 people. This little person wrestling events are so in demand, 2 distinct units dubbed Micro 1 and Micro 2 travel simultaneously across the country. Each competitor will easily wrestle more than 200 times as MWF puts on more than 450 shows annually. Tour include Micro Run features the popular athletes, including Sicko. The worst part of life on the road is being stuck in a van with 8 smelly micros, but it's all worth it. Everywhere we get there, it's a mom-up Sicko fan. Sorry, I'm losing it. Micro One was at the Jaguar Room in Denver, the Oasis nightclub, Copper Room, Ballroom, and so on. Micro 2 is making its way through the Midwest. All this as another batch of up-and-coming stars work the home front, where micro wrestling is headquartered in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. So this is something we also talked about, and no one else, maybe besides like OVW, is able to do this, where you have a place that you run consistently, and you're able to draw. Nightly shows there run Wednesday through Saturday all year round in their 300-seat micro arena. I'm emphasizing this because really no other pro wrestling promotions are doing this. Okay. Everywhere we go, people like to pick me up. They like the whole. Okay, I'll just skip that part. What else? I wanted to talk about one more element of this. Bringing back a nostalgia for the heyday of WrestleMania. So the other interesting part, and then I'll conclude with this. Waterhouse, Pinky, is originally from Maine. Her father and uncle played Queasy and Sleazy, part of Jerry Lawler's Three Kings, which is awesome, just to show that lineage, the bloodline,
yes,
if you will. So really, and again, like, it is different. I'm not necessarily a fan of the way it's promoted and so on, but you could run from Wednesday to Saturday, 300-seat venue. It seems like they're doing really well there. From what I understand, Pigeon Forge, Tennessee is sort of like a truckers or southern tourism spot. And then you have 2 groups that are crisscrossing the whole country and drawing. And this was really even before this Discovery reality show.
They seem to be doing pretty well. They have an audience. You know what I mean? It's hard to get in the wrestling sometimes, but they do have their audience.
We need a collective like micro wrestling, soft ground wrestling, just to bring these unique promotions all to one place.
Yes, totally agree. But let's wrap this bad boy up and let's head towards the plugs. You follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Lavi, what do you got going on?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter and X, Lavimarg, LAVIEMARG. Check out my recent book review of the Macho Man book on LionCubJobSearch.com, and check out our LinkedIn group, The Business of the Business Pro Wrestling Industry, which includes wrestling jobs when we find them.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. See you right back here next time for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.